Hey film fans, I know some of my longtime viewers are looking at the title of this video and maybe thinking, wait, what? What can I say? I like to have my fun sometimes too. So if you want to come along, join me as I rank all 9 Fast and Furious films. Hey everybody, my name's Aaron Hunter, and if you're new to the channel because of this video, thanks for coming along. You should know off the top, I don't normally do this kind of thing here. My videos tend to be more about kind of art films, old movies, foreign films, and so on. But as I said at the top, I like to have my fun too. And if you're a longtime viewer, I'm not going to try to convince you that these films are somehow art. I'm probably not going to be doing one of these in a what makes this film great video, but I do think as far as blockbuster action films go, there's a lot going on in the Fast and Furious films, and to get to the point, I like them. So I'm going to rank them. This will include all 9 of the main saga films, and if you stick around to the end, I'll give you a few thoughts on the Hobbs Shaw spin-off. A few caveats. This is my opinion. Everyone's got their own opinions. But my opinion's probably colored by at least 2 things. First of all, I came to the series late. I didn't really start watching these films until about 5 years ago. And I think that affected my reception of the films because I didn't live through the kind of dry years. I wasn't there for the release of Too Fast, Too Furious when there was no Vin Diesel and no Mia and no Letty and all that sort of stuff, or the release of Tokyo Drift when there was no anybody. I didn't have to wait 2 or 3 years to figure out what was going on, and so on. I watched about the first 5 or 6, I think, within about 10 days of each other. So those lapses, or those seeming lapses as they were first released in the narrative, didn't matter that much to me. However, I do remember, for example, when Tokyo Drift came out and critics were like, why is this even called Fast and Furious? And when I watched it, I knew going in, this is the one that sticks out somehow. I also remember being in the cinema and seeing the trailer for number 4. And I hadn't seen any of the films. I didn't know very much about them. And the trailer's basically a recut of that opening scene, which I'll come back to. And it's one of the few times that I've been in a cinema and a trailer has got applause. Almost everyone in the cinema cheered because they knew it was coming. They knew all about bringing the team or the family back together and all that sort of stuff. I had no clue. I was like, oh, that's Michelle Rodriguez. She's in Lost. That's about all I knew at that point. And I knew when Paul Walker died because at the time I was teaching English. I was doing my PhD, just finishing it up, and I was teaching English as a second language as a kind of side gig, and I had students from Spain, from Saudi Arabia, from Brazil, from Korea, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, all around Europe. And the days after Paul Walker died, I couldn't believe how many of them were distraught about this, like really wrecked about it. And I barely knew who this guy was, but they were having a kind of James Dean or River Phoenix moment. And what really surprised me about that was the sort of international scope of it. So the students from Saudi Arabia and Brazil and Spain were all kind of upset. And that was actually what first kind of got me interested in thinking, maybe I should watch these films. This guy, Paul Walker, has this appeal that I didn't know anything about, maybe because of my age, maybe because I was like not into blockbuster movies or whatever it was. So anyway, I came to the films a little bit differently than some of you longtime fans might have. The second thing is I am a film professor. I do mostly work on sort of smaller films, indie films. I love watching films directed by women. I love watching foreign language films, which one could argue the Fast and Furious films are to a certain extent. I like action films. I like blockbusters. I'm not a huge fan of them. There's the ones that appeal to me, and then the others that I don't have much time for, which this series once was. So my ranking is going to be sort of colored by what I appreciate about character development, I know, but it's there. Character development, narrative, the story, the melodrama, the kind of soap opera parts of this, and I will talk about some of my favorite stunts and some of my favorite action set pieces in the films, but I think my ranking is going to be different from a lot of the ones I've read online from different sort of movie and pop cultural magazines. So, with that being said, let's get into it. Before we get started, if you're here and you haven't seen these films before, I should warn you, spoilers ahead. I do rank number 9 in here, and I'll minimize the spoilers on that because it's out in the cinema still. But for 1 through 8, I'm not going to hold back. So if you haven't seen them and you want to, be forewarned. Coming in at number 9 is 2017's The Fate of the Furious, or the 8th installment. This is the only film in the series that I now find to be a bit of a chore to watch. There are good parts to it. I like some of the gamesmanship between Cypher and Dom and the team. But this one feels to me, it's the only one that really feels like clunky, bloated. I think it really feels the absence of Paul Walker's Brian, in the absence of a male heart-to-heart bonding scene. These are small scenes, but they're really important to me and my kind of enjoyment of the films. In all of the films from 1 through 7, there always comes a scene, usually about 2/3 of the way through as we kind of break into Act 3, sometimes a little bit earlier, where the two principal male characters have a heart-to-heart conversation. In a lot of ways, these scenes are kind of the emotional grounding of the entire series. The Fast and the Furious franchise is about a lot of things. It's about explosions, about international intrigue. It's about...
I live my life a quarter mile at a time.
But it's also about male friendship. And I think that's one of the things that's appealing about it, because it doesn't shy away from the friendship, but because of the type of films they are, it seems to want to present it in a kind of bro-y way. There's a lot of one-liners and one-upsmanship, and of course, who's the fastest, who has the best car. But there are these moments in 1 through 7 where the two main guys get together and they discuss their fears, their past, and these are the scenes that sort of provide the emotional depth of the series. In the very first film, you get Dom and Brian talking, and Dom tells Brian about what happened with his father and why he went to jail. In the 7th film...
Hell, I saw your courage the day I met you.
Right.
Want to know the bravest thing I ever saw you do? Be a good man to Mia. Being a great father to my nephew, Jack.
In the 2nd film, you get Brian and Roman discussing what happened, how Roman ended up going to jail, and kind of learning how to forgive each other and bond and become friends. And we even get it in Tokyo Drift with Sean and Han. So that goes away in 8. And I think it's one of the things that the series suffers from the absence of a Brian character. And it's one of the things that I find kind of empty about Part 8. And I love Charlize Theron, but I don't love Cypher as a villain. She plays it fine. It's not about her performance. It's about the writing. And I think that, I don't know, if I was Dom, I would be like, take that psychobabble, take that pseudo-philosophical nonsense about fate and just, can it? Because it's not good and it's not well written. It's not clever gamesmanship pseudo-philosophy. It's just paper-thin nonsense. I hate the fridging of Elena in this film. Like, her having got pregnant and given birth to the child is already a kind of continuity stretch, but I can totally live with that in these films. But the way they did her character wrong it's one of the few really sort of like misogynist missteps in the series. And I hate to watch that scene because she's not killed for any reason other than to motivate Dom. And that's classic fridging. And if you don't know what that is, I'll put a link below. But coming in at number 8 is F9 from 2021, the newest iteration in the series. Like I said, I'm not going to say too much about it. And it's clunky in a different way from 8. 8 feels tired to me. 9 feels like they're running out of ideas. And it's different because I feel like the cast brings a lot of energy to this. And there's a lot of interesting things going on. I love, there's a kind of a flashback structure that I won't say too much about. but I think it's very interesting and for the most part works really well in the film. The opening is very different and it's related to that flashback structure, and I loved the opening of this. And I think there are some really good moments. There's a scene where Dom hugs somebody, which is the most sort of physical affection that Dom gives to almost anyone in the entirety of the series. And it's a really touching moment because it looks like Vin Diesel cares in that moment. And even though there are some very big set pieces and one famous one that I won't say too much about, or infamous, that happens high in the sky, a lot of the action is grounded back on the street. And I appreciate that about it. It's bigger than, sort of 1 through 4 in terms of explosions and the size of the vehicles. But after the expansive insanity of 5, 6, 7, 8, it's back down on the street. And I like that about it. The cinematography is great. It looks really good. But I feel like also the script doesn't hold together as well as some of the bigger blockbuster ones. It just feels like a series of set pieces strung together, which you could argue a lot of the films are, but the sort of fibers of, the tendons and the muscles and the skeletal system of heart and character holding that all together, it feels a little forced. Also, this script again suffers like Part 8 for a lack of that male bonding scene, that heart-to-heart scene where the two principal male characters share their sort of fears, desires, hopes, dreams, their past, and all of that stuff. The film hints at it with John Cena, but they never have that scene. And to be honest, I don't know a lot about John Cena, but in this film, he's kind of a charismatic sinkhole. I'm sure he's gonna blossom into a fine performer, but not so much here. Having said that, I will watch this one again, and I don't think it'll be a chore because there was enough in it that I loved that will make it very rewatchable. Coming in at number 7 is Tokyo Drift. Now, this one is this is the sore thumb of the series. If you haven't seen the series or if you haven't paid sort of attention, this film, which was the part 3, featured none of the main cast of the first 2 films. So in a lot of ways, it feels like a spin-off of the first 2 films. It feels like they're just gonna start calling racing movies Fast and Furious, and it doesn't matter who's in them or what they're about or where they're set. Since then, it has been worked into the continuity in some really ingenious ways, but it does stick out as the only film in the series that doesn't feature any of the family, barring a surprise cameo at the end of the film. I like Tokyo Drift. It's a lot of fun. Sean's a good character. I don't love the sort of bad boy daddy issue stuff, not because it's not done well, but because it's been done so many times. But I like Sean. I think Neela's a really great character, and they keep bringing people back from the past films, and I wouldn't mind knowing what's going on with Neela after the events of Tokyo Drift. Of course, Tokyo Drift introduces Han.
I want to see what the kids got.
Everybody loves Han, and he's fantastic in Tokyo Drift because in Tokyo Drift, he's this kind of enigmatic character, and that's been played up since then, but we don't know very much about him, and he serves as this sort of mentor to Sean, and that works really well. And the sort of tragic ending of Han in that film, which obviously gets reworked in several different ways throughout the series, is a really strong and powerful moment. So I think Tokyo Drift's great. I mean, at this point, once we get in the top 7, they're all really strong films, I think. And my ranking is gonna get stranger and stranger. But number 7 is Tokyo Drift. Great film, lots of fun, killer soundtrack, pretty good villain, great racing. Yeah, it's a ton of fun. You can watch it on its own or you can watch it as part of the larger continuity. It's a really solid film. Coming in at number 6, and this might surprise a few people, is 2015's Furious 7. I enjoy the hell out of Furious 7. It's kind of, in a way for me, the apotheosis of the believable nonsense. So, for example, you get this.
Okay, here we go.
That's right. They jump out of a plane with parachuted cars. And you get this.
John, cars don't fly! Cars don't fly! Oh, shit!
Wait, not once. That's right. They jump a car between skyscraper towers twice. It's fantastic. It's the first film after the previous 4 entries not to be shot by Justin Lin and James Wan, sort of well-respected indie horror filmmaker. Brings a lot of energy, a lot of visual panache to this film, and I love it. But this one, with those stunts I just showed you, with the whole idea of God's eye, for me, who loves the sort of street level, on the ground connections between these characters, it takes the outrageous just a little too far. I still love it. That's not necessarily negative, but it's kind of gone over the hill. But having said that, there are a lot of things I like. I like Ramsey. I think they could do more with her character. She's now been in 3 films, and there's a lot of potential for her. Nathalie Emmanuel's got a great screen presence, and she has good chemistry with a lot of the characters. I kind of wish something would happen with her and Tej. I don't know if you've noticed in this series, but as sort of multi-ethnic, multicultural, multilingual as the films are, the black men in the film don't get to have relationships. They don't get to have the big, epic loves, or even the big sort of epic, sexy relationships. There's, Brian, Sean gets a little bit, certainly Dom, but Tej and Roman are kind of left out in the cold when it comes to that. Come on, man. Give those guys some love. Anyhow, Jason Statham, great, always great, magnificent screen presence. Not my favorite villain in the series. He's kind of become an unstoppable death machine instead of a kind of a person with flaws and defects and motivations, although again, he's fantastic in the role. Of course, I love the ending. It touches me every time. For those of you who don't know, during the filming of 7, Paul Walker, who plays Brian, a mainstay, one of the key characters in the whole series, died ironically somewhat in a car crash. They shut down production for a few months, and then they came back, retooled the film. They got some stand-ins for Walker, including his brothers and his stunt double, and put in a really touching ending that's kind of like a celebration of the characters, Dom and Brian's friendship, but also a really like tasteful, beautifully emotional farewell to Paul Walker. And that almost got this one higher on my list, but the over-the-top stuff just pulled it back a little bit. Coming in at number 5, and I'm sure some of you have been thinking like, wait, why hasn't he said this yet? Is 2003's first sequel, Too Fast, Too Furious. Too Fast, Too Furious. Too Fast, Too Furious. Perhaps the dumbest sequel title of all time, but I really like this film. As I said before about number 8, I find it a real chore to rewatch that one. I can throw number 2 on anytime. Day, night, if I'm hungover, if I've had a few drinks, if I'm just sitting around and all my like fancy fun little art films just aren't like firing anything for me, yeah, I'm gonna watch Too Fast, Too Furious because it's fun. It doesn't take itself seriously. I think it's the entry in the series that has the most fun. It's beautifully made. I think John Singleton gets something about this series that none of the other directors have got, and it's a sense of like fun meets vibrancy. The way he shoots the races, the way he understands color, like just take a look at this.
I got this. Get at it.
It's very simple, but it gives it a kind of video game anime aesthetic that I think a lot of the other filmmakers kind of miss. And the racing is great, the action is great, and I love the characters. I think Roman in this film is the Roman that I like. Tyrese is a magnificent screen presence, and as he goes through the series and he becomes kind of a comic relief sidekick, but in Too Fast, he's bristling with a kind of ferocity that his character loses in later iterations. A lot of people, when they write about this, say that Tyrese is kind of a stand-in for Vin Diesel's Dom, but I don't think that's quite right. Whereas Vin Diesel's Dom has this kind of quiet reserve that explodes on occasion, Tyrese is just always on the edge. He's always there in Too Fast, Too Furious. And his chemistry with Brian is great from the first moment they're together on screen and they have that fist fight throughout the film. And as opposed to, for example, what I said about parts 8 and 9, it has one of the great male-to-male heart-to-hearts when Brian and Therese are there and the sunset's going down and they're finally realizing, they're apologizing about their past mistakes and they're preparing to move on. And this is an important part of the series, and it does it really effectively in number 2. I also like Eva Mendes. I think they do something really interesting. It could have been better, but they make an effort. So she's undercover. She's been undercover for a year, and Tyrese is really suspicious of her. She's sleeping with the enemy, and there's a tinge of what we call slut shaming to Tyrese's approach to her. And I find that in films about women who go undercover, that slut shaming is sort of de rigueur for cinema, and it drives me nuts when it happens, because when men go undercover, there's an assumption that, of course, they're gonna sleep with whoever they have to sleep with, and that's just part of the job. So that double standard is there. But what I love about Too Fast, Too Furious is that Brian and Ava's handlers are like, it's part of the job. So I find that refreshing. Also, I think Cole Hauser as the villain Carter does a good job. I read a lot of reviews about this, and I think he was on a TV show in the United States where he plays a completely different character, so some people found him unbelievable as a villain. But what I like about him as the villain is that he's on screen a lot. He interacts with the characters a lot. So in some of the films, we have this sort of cat and mouse where the villain and our heroes don't meet for most of the film until maybe some climactic moment at the end, or sometimes they don't actually meet on screen. And I love the way that Carter and Brian and Roman are constantly sort of circling around each other. And I think his viciousness, for me, who doesn't know the actor from anywhere else, really works, particularly in that scene with the undercover cop when they use the rat, and it's just vicious. And to me, the edge of nastiness in his character, the way he talks to Monica, Eva Mendes' Monica, is brutal. So I buy him as a bad villain, and I think he's one of the better villains in the series, actually. So for me, Too Fast, Too Furious is fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It still has that ground level street aesthetic that I really like. Coming in at number 4.
Wanna go for a drive?
The granddaddy, the one that started it all, the top of the chart, the top of the pops, 2001's The Fast and the Furious. Considered at the time a sort of cheap street level knockoff of Point Break. I'm sure they didn't think in 2001 that this was gonna sort of be the birth of a 20+ year franchise. But all the elements of what make the franchise great are there. There's friendship, there's family, there's street racing, there's fight scenes, there's dynamic stunts, there are the thematic elements, this idea of what happens when a person who's got a code of honor, a code of ethics, is put in a situation that forces him or her to choose between that code and doing something that is going to undermine the code, but might save some people, might save the family. And you get this in the first one with Brian having to decide, I'm a lawman. But at the same time, I think Dom's been misjudged, and I think Dom's doing what he does because the system has put him in this place, and my allegiance to Dawn is growing, and Brian is torn there. And that leads to the fantastic ending of the film, which in my opinion is probably, like, if that ending hadn't been in there, I don't know if the franchise could have or would have become what it did, because that's where Brian makes that choice about what his code's gonna be. What does he really believe? And because he makes the choice he does,
You know what you're doing?
I owe you a 10-second car.
that allows what would become the franchise to blossom. It's also got the kick-ass women, the multi-ethnic cast, which I don't think we can sort of underplay the importance of. I mean, this is part of this franchise's global appeal. If you look at all the big blockbuster franchises in the world, Marvel, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, the DC movies, even James Bond, they're pretty white. And they rarely feature more than one or two, oftentimes kind of token people of color. Whereas from the very first Fast and the Furious film, we get an array of American and international sort of racial backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds. In fact, Paul Walker as Brian and later Sean in the third movie are really only the primary white protagonists in the entirety of the film. Later we'll get white villains, we get Mr. Nobody and so on. But the heart of this film is a multiracial, multi-ethnic cast. And that's a really important thing because American films still today in 2021 aren't as expressive about the reality of the makeup of American population as the Fast and Furious films are. It's the beating heart of the series, and if you haven't seen any of these movies, throw on number one. It's got its flaws. The script's not my favorite. There's some, I wouldn't call them plot holes, but kind of inconsistencies or plot points that are sort of glossed over, times compressed in funny ways. So you might find yourself going, wait, what, who? But it's a consistently entertaining, fast-paced, fun movie with a lot of heart. Okay, this brings us to the top three. Boom, boom, boom. And I could have personally put any of these three at number one. At least one of my top three already by now. Some of you are scratching your head and going, wait, what? Because it falls down a lot lower on other people's lists. And my number three is probably going to do the same thing because for me, number three is 2011's Fast Five. I know, in a lot of ways, Fast Five is the apotheosis of this series. It's the perfect meeting point between the sort of gritty, street-level, practical effects, believability of the first four films, and the more airborne, physically questionable, explosive, special effects laden back four of the series, and it comes right in the middle. It's probably has my favorite cinematography. Stephen Windon, who's worked with Justin Lin on most of these films, it feels like he's come into what the films are supposed to be here. So it's got all those sweeping shots that Lin uses where the cars are going one way, the camera's going another way. It's got the great handheld stuff in the close-up action fights. Rio looks fantastic in it. It's a great setting. I love this film, and I understand why for most people this is the number one film. Couple of things about it that don't fly for me. First of all, I don't like The Rock in this series, and in particular in this film. I like Dwayne Johnson. My son and I will watch the Jumanjis once a year until he's too old and too cool to watch the Jumanjis, and then after 5 or 6 years, he'll sort of forget that, you don't have to be cool to watch a movie, and then we'll get back to watching them every year again, and probably until I'm gone. But in this film in particular, he's The Rock. He's not Dwayne Johnson. He's The Rock, and he's got this like unstoppable force, and I didn't love that about Statham in the seventh film, and I like it even less about The Rock here, Dwayne Johnson. He's a magnetic screen presence. I get why people like him. I don't like the way he's written, and I don't like his dialogue. I don't like the way he treats Elena. I don't like his mentality about like the hunt. I get why people do, and it's a good performance for what it is, but it just, every time he comes on screen and says, "Do what I say, woman," I'm like, oh, man, like, be cool. and because of that unstoppable force, his turn at the end, to me, doesn't ring true. It's a cool plot point, and I get it, but it doesn't work within the way the character's been written and performed. The other thing is Reyes, played by Joaquin de Almeida, pardon my pronunciation. It's a great performance, and he's a great villain with a lot of potential. But as I've already mentioned, for me, the villains I like best in the series are the villains that we see a lot of interaction with. And we do get a couple interactions between him and the gang, particularly before the whole family shows up. But most of the time he's there in his office being threatening and killing minions and things like that. And so his threat level is diminished in a way. And like I said, it is a great performance. He's one of the most memorable villain presences, but I don't like the way he's kept away from the team for most of the film. On the flip side though, I think this probably has the best action. It has the safe scene, which is maybe the last believable, stretching the word believable, climax of any of the films, maybe until number 9. And it has this scene.
We need to split up. You and Mia head south. I'll lead them away.
No.
Dom's right. If we got lucky, we just got. What happens next time? We have no choice but to split
I'm
up.
pregnant. I already lost my family once. I'm not going through that again.
You kidding me?
No.
I'm not going anywhere. Okay?
Tom, promise me we stick together.
Promise. Family just got bigger.
That's one of my favorite scenes in the whole series. I was talking earlier about the sort of male heart-to-hearts, and one of the things that this series does really well, I said it's a series about male bonding, is that it often doesn't understand, or the men don't understand how to bond, and the women end up acting as kind of mediators. And what you get with Brian and Dom and Mia is 3 different relationships. You have Brian and Mia, Brian and Dom, Dom and Mia, and those are all different relationships, and the 2 guys kind of use Mia, and I don't mean that in a negative way. They benefit from Mia's presence to allow them to get closer. So for Brian, he loves Mia, clearly, but he also loves Dom, and Mia is like a conduit for him to get into the family, to get into the life. And for Dom, obviously he loves his sister, he's very protective of her, but he also misses, we know this from early on in the first film when he talks about his dad, he misses sort of domesticity, an actual sort of nuclear, if not nuclear, domestic family. And Mia, to Brian, is sort of Dom's pathway to that. And I find this scene beautiful and lovely and fascinating, because what does Mia do? She's withheld her pregnancy throughout the first sort of third of the film, and now she's finally ready to tell. Does she go to Dom first to get advice for how to tell Brian? Does she go to Brian first with this great news? No, she goes to both, and then they all hug. And to me, in a lot of ways, that's an emblematic symbol of the Fast and Furious franchise. Coming in at number 2, and I think this might be the biggest surprise on the list, 2009's Fast and Furious, the 4th film in the franchise. I don't know why this film gets so much flack. I love it. The stunts are great. That opening...
There's 1K left. We're running out of road. Get in there, brother.
Got it, I got it.
Come on. Oh, shit.
Key cut loose.
Brian chasing the guy through Los Angeles. It's fantastic. It's gritty. The relationships are complex as they are in almost any of the films. There's a bunch of great new characters. We get a little bit of like what happened with Han and Dom at the end of the third one. Really good music, a great villain. Number 4 is incredible. I love this one. I love the way the film's editing and script slowly bring Brian and Dom together. I love the way they spend much of the middle act distrusting each other. The film, I think, really earns Brian and Dom's coming back together after the events of the first film. And I love that it like spends the time to do that when they're in Braga's clubs or when they're racing each other. There's this like, you get that they both understand that there was a connection in the first film, and you get that they both understand that that connection was broken when it turned out that Brian was a cop. And you get that they both understand that by giving Dom the keys and letting him go, that was Brian's peace offering, but it wasn't enough yet. So that's all in that middle act where Brian and Dom are sort of circling around each other as they're both going after Braga for different reasons. Braga, as played by John Ortiz, is one of my favorite villains, probably my second favorite villain in the series, because he's a ground level villain who's there all the time. Of course, we don't know that the first time we're watching. We think Ortiz is playing Braga's henchman, but the fact that he's actually playing Braga, that's one of the best twists in the whole series. Not like the re-arrival of Letty or Han or anything like that. It's like, he was Braga all along. Gal Gadot's Giselle gets introduced here. I don't think they've quite figured out her character in this version yet, and she really sort of blossoms in parts 5 and 6, but she's still a very cool part of the Fast and Furious family. I love the tunnel chases. Before we get to jumping out of planes and jumping across skyscrapers, we're gonna move off the streets, but still on this sort of ground level, believable, sort of, if these guys are really good drivers. But that chase sequence at the end through the tunnels, I find it thrilling. And I love the way Mia comes back in and her distrust of Brian and the way that she and Brian sort of re-find each other. So there's a lot going on in this film. And a lot of critics and a lot of fans paint it as a sort of table setter for number 5. And there is some truth to that. But I think it's more than that. I think this does a lot of the emotional heavy lifting that really sets up, that is table setting, I guess, but in a believable, thrilling way that sets up the rest of the series. If you're a longtime Fast and Furious fan, give 4 another chance. I think it's better than most people think it is. Coming in at number 1, 2013's Fast and Furious 6, which is the 6th. This for me is what I think 5 is for a lot of people. The emotional beats, the character development, the whole team complex and makeup, the villain, the action, the stunts. In this film, for me, everything fires. First of all, it has my favorite villain, Luke Evans as Owen Shaw. They kind of soften him up in part 8, but he's a great villain. He has a lot of interaction. There's that great scene with him and Toretto where they're talking about family and a code and all that stuff. But we also get to know his team a little bit more than any of the other films where, you know, we don't know them a lot, but we know a little bit about the big blonde guy. We know a little bit about the cool woman driver. And we see the guy fighting with Han and Roman in the subway, and that he's a kick-ass fighter. And that's really important for the climax of the film, that we spend time with them, getting to know them. Of course, that's partly because Letty's there, and we have to follow Letty's development throughout this film. But I think that that makes the world feel more lived in when we spend that much more time with these different villains. The emotional development of the characters here is great. Of course, there's Han and Giselle. There's the friendship between Dom and Brian is really blossoming here as Brian comes to the realization that maybe everything that's happened with Letty really is his fault. And of course, there's Dom's yearning to help Letty, to fix Letty, to get her back, which leads to what I think is the best stunt special effect action sequence in the entire series.
here.
Okay, Toretto. Here's your girl. And your happy ending.
Letty!
I mean, come on, it's incredible. That is what a stunt should be. It's not just audacious. It's not just insane. It's emotional. It means something. Dom does that to save Letty, even though she's been helping Shaw try to kill them and kill like innocent bystanders all over this bridge. And that moment is just so thrilling and beautiful. And to me, it's a distillation of this series at its best. The ending is amazing. I know people look at it after the fact and go, how long is that frickin' runway? I get it. But it's shot and choreographed and edited so excellently that when you're caught up in it, when you watch it, every time I watch it, I forget that this runway must be as long as like 5 space shuttle runways, right? And part of the reason is, going back to what I said before about getting to know Shaw's crew and all of that sort of stuff, is that every sub set piece here, regardless of who's fighting whom, who's in which car, who's jumping from where to where, they all matter. They've all been set up. All of these characters have different relationships. So everything that happens throughout this entire sequence has stakes beyond just, are they going to stop the bad guys or are the bad guys going to win? Everything is moving in so many different pieces. And it has emotion. There's Giselle saying goodbye to Han, giving her life to save the man she loves. There's the second fight between Letty and Gina Carano. And there's that amazing ending, Dom's amazing ending as he comes out through the flames. It's just, to me, Fast and Furious 6, more than any of the other films, does what a Fast and Furious movie should do. That's all for now, everybody. Thanks so much for watching. If you're still here at this point, why don't you throw the video a like, maybe even hit the subscribe button, share it with your friends. I'd love to read your Fast and Furious ranking. Throw it in the comments below, or maybe you hate these films, let me know. Maybe you really appreciate the fact that somebody took the time to talk about them this way. I'd love to know that too. If you're new to the channel, like I said at the top, if you've been drawn in by this topic, thanks for stopping by. A lot of the other stuff might not be up to your speed, but have a poke around. You might find something you really like. And if you're one of my longtime viewers and you're like, Aaron, what the hell are you doing? Look, like I said, I like to have my fun. Every once in a while, not too often, I'll throw up something more mainstream like this, but don't worry, I'll be back soon with more What Makes This Film Great, more Break the Scene. But until then, I'm Aaron Hunter. Keep watching movies. What's that? Ah, yes, Vanessa Kirby. Sorry, I forgot to talk about Vanessa Kirby. I forgot to talk about Hobbs and Shaw. Hobbs and Shaw is fine. As I've already made clear earlier in this video, Luke Hobbs is not my favorite character in the series. I will say that Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham have great chemistry, and yeah, it's fun to watch them throw barbs and throw fists at each other throughout the film. I'll watch Vanessa Kirby stare at the wall for 2 hours, so that made this a no-brainer for me. And I appreciate the way the film delves into Hobbs' past and the exploration of his Polynesian, his Samoan roots. I think it was quite fascinating that the film spent so much time going into it and going into Hobbs' efforts to kind of reconnect with his roots and his family. And that does tie it, obviously, to the main franchise. I like the idea of the Samoans at the end fighting the big bad guys. That works really well. But this is kind of a throwaway film. It's enjoyable. I'd probably watch it again, but that's the best I can say about it. I'd like to see Vanessa Kirby do some more action films. I thought she was great in this, but it just doesn't work for me as a Fast and Furious piece, even as a spin-off. Your mileage may vary. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you again soon.